And so it begins. The culture war over Greta Gerwig and Netflix's remake of the Chronicles of Narnia is ramping up over in Chud space, over in the Pakled channels. But it's only ramping up right now among the Farm League, the Bush Leaguers, the D-tier anti-fan channels. And we're going to take a look at it because it's fun. Hey everybody, thanks for stopping by my channel. I really appreciate it. My name's Bob of the Old Ways. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. Before we go forward, please be sure to do all the algorithmic things. You know the drill. I'll try to put a little logo on the screen or something to remind you, but you're all grown-ups. You know how YouTube works. So what we're looking at right now is a headline from Deadline saying that Meryl Streep is in talks to play Aslan in Greta Gerwig and Netflix's Narnia movie. Now this intrigues me as a lifelong Narnia fan, but I may be in the minority there, or at least someone is trying to make me think and make you think that I'm in the minority because they're astroturfing a campaign against this, very much the way they did with the Rings of Power. And some of you may know that my channel basically grew to the point where it is today because I was making Rings of Power content in defense of the show because I like it a lot. And one of the things I learned from that experience is that the hate campaign, the culture war grift around Rings of Power started years before the first episode ever aired. It started way back when the deal was first made by Amazon. And we see something similar happening here with the Chronicles of Narnia for many of the same reasons. And unlike with Rings of Power, I'm going to be able to track it in real time. So that's what this video is about. What we're going to look at today is the crash out that a lot of D-tier Bush League anti-fan channels are having over this. And I want to look at these small timers that I would not normally look at because they are where the talking points of the big dogs like Nerdrotic and Geeks and Gamers and the Critical Drinker first get tested out. And the thing that happens at this level, at the level of the channels we're looking at, is that they do not play hide the ball with their actual agenda, unlike Nerdrotic and Geeks and Gamers and so forth. What I mean by that is that as you're going to see in the videos that I look at, the talking points of anti-fan channels like Nerdrotic, etc., have their origins in white Christian nationalism, and they always have. The entire project of being an anti-fan channel like Nerdrotic is to normalize and whitewash the political agenda of Christian nationalism to an audience and for an audience that sees itself as apolitical and non-religious. If you are someone who thinks or has ever heard someone who thinks that Ray is a Mary Sue, or that there's too much forced diversity in media, or that Hollywood has a woke agenda run by cultural Marxists who want to dismantle Western civilization and traditional masculinity, all of that comes from white Christian nationalism starting around 2016 or so. It is the only place it has ever come from. It is not everyday common sense like it might seem now 10 years after the fact if you're just coming into this without knowing the history. So what we're seeing on these channels that we're going to look at and the articles we're going to look at is the beginning of that process. We have a bunch of far right-wing religious channels who are going to misrepresent themselves as the default Christian voice and talk about a property, the Chronicles of Narnia, that a lot of conservative white evangelicals in the United States think that they own, even though their version of Christianity is very different from the version of Christianity that inspired the Chronicles of Narnia in the first place. So keep your eye on that ball. You're going to see a lot of them say that this is an offense to Christians, that this is an assault on Christians and so forth. And it's not. Everything that we know so far about this movie or this series of movies is entirely compatible with C.S. Lewis's version of Christianity and with Christianity broadly. And you don't have to be a Christian at all to enjoy these stories because they're well told and a lot of fun. So it's also worth noting before we go forward that this might not even be true. Right now, there's no indication that the Meryl Streep thing is anything more than an April Fool's joke that got out of hand, but there's been no official denial from anyone involved, so we can treat it like it's true, at least for purposes of this video. So let's move forward and have a little bit of fun and engage in a little bit more framing. Because before looking at a couple of video clips, I want to look at some websites that you may notice the big channels using. So the first website I want to look at here is called Fandom Pulse. Now, Fandom Pulse is a website that poses as a legitimate fan news site, and they talk about gaming, they talk about comic books, they talk about movies and TV shows and so forth. And Fandom Pulse is a website that is very frequently used, not always used, but often used by the big dogs in the anti-fan space, like Nerdrotic, like Geeks and Gamers, like RK Outpost, and all of them. And what they'll normally do is something that looks like this. They'll show the Fandom Pulse, or they won't show it, actually. They'll scroll up so that all you see is something that looks like this: the title of the article and a picture. They will hide the fact that they're using Fandom Pulse. And then they'll scroll down and they'll do something like this. What you'll see here is that the first paragraph or two or three is basically cut and paste from another source like Deadline or The Hollywood Reporter and so forth. And the anti-fan channel will read that out loud, and then they'll stop at a certain point. They'll get to say, right here, I'm not reading this article out loud, but let's just say this word right here, production, was the end of the cut and paste portion of the article. And then they'll stop. So what you'll see on the screen is something that looks like this. They'll read the cut and paste portion, and then they'll go on their rant about forced diversity or feminism or whatever. And what they'll hide from you is the rest of the article, where the article taps into sources who say deranged things like the following: feminism is incompatible with Christianity. No, it's not. Which C.S. Lewis made explicitly clear his stories were meant to evangelize. Dale O'Leary explains, quote, "From the beginning, the goals of feminism were clear: destruction of patriarchy, control of reproduction, including contraception, abortion, and reproductive technologies, destruction of the father-headed family with divorce and illegitimacy made normal, all women in the workforce, no man able to support his family, and free 24-hour daycare, destruction of all male institutions, total sexual liberation, including sex for children, homosexuality and bisexuality, and destruction of worship of God as Father." Almost none of that is true. That's not what feminism is. Feminism is not incompatible with Christianity. But what's important about that quote is that it links to a very conservative, arguably far right-wing religious source. And that's the thing that you need to remember about Fandom Pulse. Fandom Pulse is a website posing as a legitimate fan news and commentary blog that's actually a front for the Christian right, for white Christian nationalism in the form of either white evangelicalism, or in this case, tradcaths, like John F. Trent, the guy who runs this website. So what's happening here is the big dogs like Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, RK Outpost, etc. will use Fandom Pulse as a source, and they'll play hide the ball with what's really going on. They'll stop right before they reach the paragraphs talking about the far right-wing white Christian nationalist agenda that is driving all of this. And what this does is serve to legitimize and normalize white Christian nationalism to a secular, apolitical audience, and make it sound like it's just everyday common sense that everybody's always agreed with. That's what's going on here. We'll look a little bit more at John F. Trent when I look at some videos, but that's the game. So another similar website that does the same thing is this one, That Park Place. Very much like Fandom Pulse, this is a website that poses as an organic grassroots fan blog site that is actually a front for political propaganda. And again, some of the big dog channels will use That Park Place as a source. When they, do what I'm doing and display an article on the screen, they'll read it or parts of it until it gets almost to the point where it starts to get really deranged, and then they'll stop and play hide the ball. So I want you to, as we go forward on this journey together, looking at the way that the moral outrage and the moral panic around Chronicles of Narnia gets astroturfed, keep your eye on these two websites and look how often they turn up in the videos of people like Nerdrotic Geeks and Gamers and so forth. So now that we've got that out of the way, and we understand that all of this, from the very beginning, has been a front for white Christian nationalism and not anything else, we can look at some channels and look at the ridiculous things they're saying about this casting rumor, which is just a rumor, I will remind you. Stay tuned. Alrighty then. Let's begin our survey of D tier and C tier anti-fan channels with a guy called the Angry Badger. I have never really heard of this guy before. He's probably not very relevant, but that's not the point now. Remember, the point is that these are the channels, the B and C and D tier grifter channels, the D tier Pakled channels, are where the talking points of the big dogs get tested out. So let's see what the Angry Badger thinks about this. Like you can't tell from the thumbnail, but here we go. The Angry Badger. Impress me, sir.
What's going on, everyone? Badger here. Should have liked and sub, and let's get into this. We talk about the fourth turning every once in a while in the streams we do, and sometimes I mention it in videos. It's more or less the cycle of people embracing religion and things get really good. This is also very similar to the strong men create good times create weak men create bad times, and the bad times create the strong men again, and then we create good times.
Oh, so it's fascism. Okay, thanks for putting that out there, buddy.
Just a circle. It goes with religious films too, where we embrace religion and things get really good, and then we push away from religion and things get really bad. It's just this cycle that keeps going. And part of the return to...
So I want to put a pin in something. Again, I've mentioned this in other parts of the video, but when these people use the word religion, remember that they are referring to a very specific and very constrained version of Christianity, usually Protestant Christianity. They are not talking about Episcopalianism. They're not talking about Wicca, right? They're not talking about any version of Christianity other than white Christian nationalism, white Protestant evangelicalism, and sometimes tradcath, which is considered heretical by the Catholic Church, by the way. They do not mean spirituality in general. They do not mean religion in general. They are referring to a specific ideology that they think should be in charge of everything.
Aslan the lion is Jesus. He's supposed to be. And we've got Meryl Streep now, who's probably going to be playing Aslan the lion. Yeah.
Oh, look at that. He's using Fandom Pulse. Let me show you the article from Fandom Pulse that he's looking at. Here it is. It's probably cut off a little bit on my screen, but this is the Fandom Pulse logo here. I'm showing it to you. The Angry Badger is not showing it to you. He's hiding his sources. He's showing you something that looks like this. Only the headline with the tagline movies and TV, right? So he is trying to give Fandom Pulse the illusion of legitimacy here. Let's see if he manipulates the text in the way that I was describing earlier.
Aslan very much is a Jesus figure.
All right, so I want you to notice what I think he's about to do right here. He highlighted the sentence that he just read out loud, but he's leaving the rest of the article on screen, right, so that you can read it. He is not going to quote it, most likely, but you can still see what it says. And by hiding his sources, the Angry Badger here is providing the illusion of legitimacy to this. This is making it look like some legit entertainment reporting outlet. This is called normalization. I don't think he's going to quote the paragraph that immediately comes after it, which says, if this report and rumor turns out to be true, it is an affront to God, C.S. Lewis, and his work, among others, etc., etc. So let's see what the Angry Badger does. Now, I will give the Angry Badger credit for one thing. He is showing the rest of the article here, The big dogs, the nerdrotics, the geeks and gamers would usually cut it off. The image would cut off right before this paragraph right here. So at least the Angry Badger is not hiding his agenda.
Talks about what Aslan is and what he does in Narnia.
All right, so props to the Angry Badger for not hiding your agenda and showing the rest of the article. It's still manipulative because without showing what this website is, really, most viewers are not going to go squint and look at the URL and look at what tabs he has open. They're just going to see the article on screen and think that this is some kind of legitimate reporting that Angry Badger is reading from here. Also, once again, note that he is referring to religion when he really specifically means white evangelical Christian nationalism, and he does not mean anything else. White evangelical Christian nationalism is not all of religion. It is not all of Christianity. It's not even the majority of Christianity. It may feel that way sometimes in the United States, but it really isn't. They are, in many ways, a diversion, both historically and theologically, from the broader Christian tradition. So just remember all that as we go forward.
Man, this is just par for the course of them saying that they're going to have a beloved franchise and they're going to adapt it, and then they change things. Of course, they're going to ignore the Christian elements.
Wait. Who says they're going to ignore the Christian elements? That's an assumption you're making there. Again, Angry Badger, when he says the Christian elements, is referring, again, to only white evangelical Christian nationalism, or possibly white tradcath radicals. He is not referring to Episcopalians. He is not referring to Lutherans, mainline Lutherans. He's not referring to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, right? He is referring to American prosperity gospel, white nationalist, evangelical Christianity. You can have a story full of Christian elements that has nothing to do with any of that. So he's assuming that because Greta Gerwig might be casting a woman in the role of God in Narnia, that woman, that Greta Gerwig must be engaged in some kind of anti-Christian agenda or something like that. There is no reason to think that. There are lots and lots of feminists who are also Christians. There's no necessary contradiction between Christianity and feminism, or between Christianity and any other form of left-wing or progressive politics. No necessary contradiction. What's happening here is something I've complained about on my channel before, which is where white American evangelical Christian nationalists are trying to colonize all other forms of Christianity and Christian expression. They are trying to brand themselves as the default Christian. And it's particularly offensive. You want to talk about offending C.S. Lewis here? C.S. Lewis was not an evangelical. He was an Anglican. And a lot of his theology would be considered heretical by evangelicals. For instance, C.S. Lewis believed and wrote and argued multiple times that pagan religions, pre-Christian pagan religions, and non-Christian religions from parts of the world that had never heard of Christ contained insights into Christ within them. In other words, that Christ was hiding inside of pagan religions and non-Christian religions outside the Christian world, so that even people from those religions could experience salvation, never having known Christ, as we know him. That is called universalism. That would be considered heresy by white Christian nationalist evangelicals. If you don't believe me, go listen to the way they talk. You can find articles written by white evangelicals saying what I just said about C.S. Lewis and arguing that C.S. Lewis should not be adopted and promoted by evangelical Christians. but they are doing this for culture war purposes. They want to claim that they are the default Christian, and then they want to force their version of Christianity on everyone else, including other Christians who don't agree with them, including pagans, including Hindus, Buddhists, etc., and non-believers. They're trying to create a theocracy in the United States, and culture war stuff like this is part of how they're doing it.
Not one word about reading the source material or respecting the source material. We get word.
There you go. Not one word about reading or respecting the source material. We have no evidence that that's true, Angry Badger. No evidence whatsoever. Again, you're baking an assumption into your argument here. There's tons of people in the world who've read the Chronicles of Narnia and loved them and respect the source material, and there's no necessary disrespect in the fact, if it is a fact, that Greta Gerwig is casting a woman to play Aslan. Depicting Aslan as female is not inherently disrespectful to Christianity, to Christians in general, or to C.S. Lewis's intentions. No necessary contradiction. You are just making that up. There's a long, long tradition in Christianity going back thousands of years of feminine portrayals of the divine. It's even in the Bible. Anytime you read the Bible and you see a reference like in the Old Testament to God protecting God's people under God's wings, that's feminine imagery in the original Hebrew, because male birds typically don't do that. Jesus himself referred to himself once as a mother hen, right? Whenever you see the word wisdom personified in the Old Testament, that's a feminine portrayal of God. There's no necessary contradiction here. Greta Gerwig could make a completely faithful adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or The Magician's Nephew, or any other Narnia book, and have Aslan be female in it, and it would not inherently disrespect C.S. Lewis at all. Okay, now we're looking at a bunch of dingbats called WDW Pro. I think these guys, at least some of the panel members, if not the host of the channel, are the crew who make the website That Park Place. And they are going to cite themselves as a source, which is always a hallmark of journalistic professionalism. But let's see what they have to say.
Netflix is despising and deriding the legacy of C.S. Lewis by gender swapping a lion that represents Christ himself.
Despising and deriding the legacy of C.S. Lewis. Isn't it odd? I find it odd anyway, how these people talk about the works of authors as if they're sacred texts, right? And even sacred texts are subject to revision over time. It's weird. I just think it's weird. Like, and it gets like down to the level where they will talk about like comic books or video games lore as if they're talking about like the Bible or the Iliad or something. It's really weird and not historically appropriate. Like, we don't know what the future canon, the future literary canon of the West is going to be. We just know what's going on right now. And even the future literary canon, whatever that turns out to be, is going to be subject to revision later on. All stories are. That's just the way storytelling works.
Has Netflix finally gone too far? Is the rumor true? We'll explain to you what's going on and why Christians may be unsubscribing in numbers never seen before.
Again, there's that framing again. Notice how they refer to themselves as Christians and not to the specific type of Christianity they advocate for. There's literally thousands of variations of Christianity in existence right now, not to mention the 2,000-year historical tradition, which has seen the widest possible expanse of ideas under the Christian umbrella that you could possibly imagine. They're pushing a specific political agenda, not defending a religious tradition.
Does it matter if they gender swap Aslan for a Netflix show? And is this the one time that Netflix perhaps should say, nah, I'm not going to do it?
Let me answer that question before Jonas does. Yes, it matters, but not in the way that you are implying. It is not inherently bad that they're doing it, and it is not part of a culture war. The culture war only exists because dingbats like you won't shut the fuck up about it. You're just aging out of the market. That's all that's happening. Stop letting your fear of missing out turn you into a reactionary dingbat.
Aslan is a male lion. I don't know if Greta Gerwig is a biologist, but female lions, otherwise known as lionesses, look different than male lions. They do not look as majestic, although...
Snopes.com, can lionesses grow manes? Female lions growing manes is not common, and scientists are unclear on the cause, but the phenomenon has been documented. Though rare, the phenomenon of female lions growing manes and exhibiting other masculine traits has been documented both in the wild and in captivity. The specific group of lions in Botswana discussed in the Reddit thread is the most thoroughly documented example of the phenomenon, with a 2-year observational study of these lions having been published in the African Journal of Ecology on 24th August 2016. So it was like almost 10 years ago. Wow. New scientists later recounted that the report's context and findings. Male lions are distinguished by their mane, which they use to attract females, and they roar to protect their territory or call upon members of their pride. Females lack a mane and are not as vocal, but sometimes lionesses grow a mane and even behave a bit like males. However, until now, reports of such maned lionesses have been extremely rare and largely anecdotal. We knew they existed, but little about how they behave. Whoopsie! It turns out gender is a spectrum, even among animals, the way God made them. Uh-oh!
Also, the grand voice of Aslan is supposed to be the voice of God, essentially. It's supposed to be Jesus in this case. And the last time I checked, God is a boy's name, and generally speaking, uses the he, him pronouns, capital H on that one.
That's interesting. So we know that God is a man, that God is male, because we know God's preferred pronouns. I thought gender was in the body, right? Does God have chromosomes? Does God have genitalia? Does God have an anatomy we can examine to determine what gender God is? Or are we just calling God he, him because that's what God prefers?
Said. What does God need with
fucking pronouns?
Interesting that you won't apply that standard to human beings. I think we've heard all we need to hear from these guys. Wow, what a bunch of dumbasses. Alrighty, let's continue our survey of D-tier anti-fan channels astroturfing moral outrage about Greta Gerwig and Meryl Streep in the Chronicles of Narnia by looking at ya boy Josiah Rises. I have addressed him, I think, once before with his boneheaded dingbat takes. I think he mostly uses Twitter for his sources, not Fandom Pulse or anything like that. But let's take a look at what kind of nonsense he has to say in his video titled "Netflix Panics After Female Aslan Backlash Gets Worse. Woke Narnia is DOA."
I have not seen a single person that has spun this idea as a positive thing.
Well, allow me to be the first. Meryl Streep is a great actor. She has played a man before. Her voice has great range. You guys are freaking out because you think that casting Meryl Streep as Aslan means that Aslan is going to be female. And aside from the fact that there's no confirmation that Meryl Streep is being considered for this role at all, and it's not just an April Fool's joke that got out of hand, there's also no reason to think that she would be playing Aslan as female in the movie. She might just be the best vocal range that Greta Gerwig has in mind for her depiction of Aslan. And this is a project that needs to do something bold to distinguish itself from the Disney adaptations and the Walden adaptations that we got like 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Not that long ago. So to stand out from that project, they got to do something bold that's going to get people's attention and yet still can be a vehicle for honoring what people love about these stories. And there's no necessary contradiction. There's no necessary disrespect. There's no necessary insult in casting a woman's voice to play Aslan. Women can do men's voices. Lots of voice actors do. I think you would be surprised how many of them do it. So yeah, I'll defend it. That's what this whole video I'm making is about.
And of course, this immediately is just the same type of crap that, of course, South Park was making fun of, that turned into a meme. Put a chick in it and make it gay. And that is exactly what Netflix is doing now with Narnia.
So it's worth pointing out that that episode of South Park also made fun of people like Josiah Rises and the things he's saying, and openly called them racists, and ultimately decided it's better to be the person saying put a chick in it and make it gay than it is to be the people who are against saying put a chick in it and make it gay. But of course, that point went right over the heads of dingbats like Josiah Rises.
Horrent, my friends. They're gender swapping Aslan. WTF, why?
How does one exactly gender swap God? Aslan is God, remember. Does God have a gender? How do we know? How do we know God has a gender? Does God have chromosomes? Does God have genitalia? Does God have an anatomy we can look at? Or are we just calling God a man because God gave us his preferred pronouns of he, him? Worth thinking about, isn't it?
I said, what does God need with
Fucking pronouns!
This woman in charge of Narnia. Make it make sense. How on earth would anyone think that this is a good idea?
It is a good idea because Greta Gerwig is a brilliant filmmaker and a brilliant screenwriter. Lady Bird is an awesome movie. Little Women is an awesome movie. Barbie is an awesome movie. You just hate women, bro. You have a problem with women, and it is obvious. You're not hiding it very well.
This the Netflix version of Aslan. This is exact.
Oh, the obligatory racist joke. God. I can see why this dude doesn't get invited on Friday Night Tights anymore. He's too mask off. How's the epic verse coming along, bro?
With all due respect to Meryl Streep's acting abilities, there's no conceivable reason to cast a female as Aslan unless it is to deliberately subvert C.S. Lewis. And
no, there's another conceivable reason to do it. It might be that Greta Gerwig has a fascination with certain themes within C.S. Lewis's work that she wants to highlight and feels can be highlighted best by casting a woman to play the voice of Aslan. If you think that's inconceivable, I would argue that you don't understand the work of C.S. Lewis very well. Maybe we'll explore C.S. Lewis's ideas about gender a bit later in this video.
so, of course, we are going to make God a female. And that's exactly what is going on here.
God is a female. God is a male. God has no gender. God is universal.
I said, what does God need with
Fucking pronouns!
You guys over there in evangelical world are the ones that like to talk about human beings being the image bearers of the Lord, right? The image bearers of God. That applies to women equally as it does to men. It applies to people of all genders as it does to men. Like it says in Genesis, God created them in his image, male and female, he created them. Women are equal to men in the eyes of God. They bear the image of God equally with men, and they are made in God's image, which means femininity is divine, just like masculinity is. C.S. Lewis would agree with me. Maybe now would be a good time to insert that reading I made from C.S. Lewis. What Ransom saw at that moment was the real meaning of gender. Everyone must sometimes have wondered why in nearly all tongues certain inanimate objects are masculine and others feminine. What is masculine about a mountain or feminine about certain trees? Ransom has cured me of believing that this is a purely morphological phenomenon, depending on the form of the word. Still less is gender an imaginative extension of sex. Our ancestors did not make mountains masculine because they projected male characteristics into them. The real process is the reverse. Gender is a reality and a more fundamental reality than sex. Sex is, in fact, merely the organic adaptation to organic life of a fundamental polarity which divides all created beings. Female sex is simply one of the things that have feminine gender. There are many others. And masculine and feminine meet us on planes of reality where male and female would be simply meaningless. Masculine is not attenuated male, nor feminine attenuated female. On the contrary, the male and female of organic creatures are rather faint and blurred reflections of masculine and feminine. Their reproductive functions, their differences in strength and size, partly exhibit, but partly also confuse and misrepresent the real polarity. From Perilandra by C.S. Lewis.
It doesn't matter what they do. The entire thing already belongs in the trash.
Your opinions belong in the garbage, and they will end up there. Guys like this, like Josiah Rises and all those other MAGA people, are going to end up in the dustbin of history, and they know it, which is why they're all freaking out now and why they're all being so radical and going so hard and moving fast and breaking things. This is their last hurrah, and they know it. So goodbye, Josiah Rises, and your retrograde, stupid takes on politics and religion. Within a generation, people who think like you won't be around anymore, and the human race will be better off for it. So we are going to breed you out of existence. Those are the rules. Sorry. We're done with this guy. Let's check out some other D-listers.
Right. So for Gerwig to sex swap Aslan is akin to saying that Christ was female, and I don't know how I don't know if this is deliberate or this is just total cluelessness, but either way, it's an insult to Christians and to.
No, it is not an insult to Christians. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but these people do not speak for Christianity. They think they do, and they want you to think they do, but they don't. They are speaking from a very specific political point of view and advancing a very specific political agenda backed, at least among white evangelical Protestants, by a theology that is almost entirely modern and in some aspects uniquely American. But they act like they have cornered the identity of Christian. I need somebody to explain to me theologically what is wrong with the concept that Jesus might be female in some other world. By your lights, Jesus chose to incarnate as a man in our world, but what's to stop him from incarnating as a female in some other world? Why is that an insult? Why is that a perversion? I don't get it. Are women image bearers of God, or are they not? Are women made in the image of God, or are they not? What's the theological problem here? I don't trust any of these people to give a good faith answer to any of that, because the answer they're going to give is going to be one based on the presumption that they speak for Christians when they only speak for themselves. I'll just lay it out flatly here. If you are a white, straight man in the United States who is a Christian, you are not oppressed. You're not oppressed for being a Christian. There are Christians in the world who are oppressed. Black Christians in the United States are genuinely oppressed. Christians in the third world are oppressed, not because they're Christians, usually, but because of the policies of first world countries. The people who birthed liberation theology were genuinely oppressed. You, Michael Grumbine and John F. Trent, you are not oppressed. You are agents of the status quo. You are agents of the tradition that is oppressing other people who are Christians too. You do not speak for the entire Christian tradition. You speak for a specifically conservative political agenda that is specifically American. And until you admit that's what you're doing, perhaps you need to admit it to yourself, you are bearing false witness. And here we have John F. Trent, the Trent Report, the man behind Fandom Pulse. I'm not sure what his exact editorial title is with that website, but he's the guy behind it. He's also the guy who was behind Bounding Into Comics, the site that used to be used by the big dogs in this content creation space, in very much the same way that they use Fandom Pulse. They would read a couple of paragraphs down and they would stop right before they got to the Christian nationalist propaganda. John Trent, because he runs Fandom Pulse, is probably not going to do that here. So what he's got here is a video called Netflix to Cast Meryl Streep as Aslan, Make Him a Woman in Narnia Films. Now, that title doesn't scream conflict. It doesn't have any randomly capitalized words. Not very good headline, not very good algo bait, which might explain the performance of John F. Trent's channel. But again, the point here is that these are the channels where the talking points, the future talking points of the big dogs get rolled out for the first time. So let's see what John F. Trent has to say about all this. All of his articles are copy-paste, right? He copy-pastes a couple paragraphs from the mainstream source like Deadline or Hollywood Reporter so that the big dogs can use his website and give it the appearance of credibility. They can use the first couple of paragraphs of his articles to pretend that they are not citing a Christian nationalist propaganda website. And then below those paragraphs, he just copy pastes deranged rants from Christian nationalists and far right-wing tradcaths who are, to put it bluntly, lying about feminism. They're lying about trans people. They're lying about whatever political shibboleth they're or whatever political windmill they're tilting at this week. These people are liars. They are bearing false witness, and it's disgusting. Anyone who considers themselves a Christian should be disgusted by this behavior. You can have all the objections you want in the world to feminism, but they have to be based on what feminism actually is, and not this deranged nightmare fantasy that John Trent cooks up of people wanting to eliminate men from the workforce and make sex for children legal. No feminist is doing that. No feminist has ever done that. And if you think they have, you either don't know what feminism is, or you're allowing yourself to be lied to by bald-faced liars like John Trent here. Clark Kent, he is not.
He did not create him as a woman. Jesus Christ is a man. He was born of the Virgin Mary. He was not a woman. He is a man. And they are trying to make him into a woman here if this report is true. It is an abomination.
Okay, it's not an abomination. It's just a creative choice. Jesus Christ was not a lion either. Last I checked. I mean, I've got a copy of the Bible right over there. Several copies, actually. None of them depict Jesus Christ as a lion. Depicting Jesus Christ as a woman in another world. Remember, this is a fictional world. And the question Lewis wanted to explore, at least in part, was how would Jesus incarnate into a world like Narnia? If it's a fantasy world full of talking animals, Jesus might incarnate as a talking animal. So what is abominable about the idea that Jesus might incarnate as a woman in some other world where Jesus feels it's more appropriate to do so? Theological geniuses, you guys are not.
Nation. It is clearly trying to promote gender ideology. It is an affront to God.
There we go. Gender ideology, something else that does not exist. All right, I'm going to correct you on the way I corrected John of the Rice on this. Gender ideology does not exist. There is no such thing. You made that up. You are lying about this. Trans people exist objectively. It is a real thing, and our acknowledging that reality is not an abomination. It is not immoral. It's not anti-Christian in any way. There are lots of trans Christians in the world. I would encourage you to go read some of their theology. It's very interesting. It is simply acknowledging what reality is and adjusting our priors appropriately. You're working from a worldview, whether you know it or not, Mr. Trent, that is fundamentalist, biblically literalist, and completely modern. There's no such thing as gender ideology. Acknowledging reality as it exists, the way God made it, you could argue, is not ideological. It's simply rational. It's reasonable. And when you argue that there is such a thing as gender ideology, you are engaging in bigotry. You are engaging in false witness. And I would encourage you to repent.
Creator of all things is an affront to C.S. Lewis. It is an affront to his creation. It should be an affront to his stepson, Douglas Gresham, who signed this deal back in
It's not an affront to any of that. And again, as I will say later, because I reacted to the other John Trent video before this one, I trust the judgment of the actual surviving family members of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien more than I trust the judgment of anyone on YouTube, including myself. Not that that's a high bar to clear, but it is just deranged to me that people who are amateur content creators on a social media website present themselves as if they are the gatekeepers, the guardians of somebody else's tradition. Look, I know this may be a hot take for a lot of you, but I'm going to say it. The people who make the Rings of Power understand Tolkien better than anyone on YouTube or in the podcast space. Get over yourselves. And the same thing is going to be true of the Netflix Narnia project. Greta Gerwig is a very insightful woman. She's a very well-read woman. She calls upon the resources of people who are more talented than her in areas where she knows she has a weakness. She's working with the surviving family members of C.S. Lewis. So I'm just going to say this. Greta Gerwig and her Chronicles of Narnia production at Netflix understands C.S. Lewis better than any of you ever will. Get over yourselves, bro. I've had enough of this. Let's just go edit this video now, shall we? Okay, and here we have one of the very bottom of the barrel anti-fan channels, John Delarose, John of the Rice, who markets himself as the leading voice in Latino science fiction or something like that, when he's really just a white nationalist maniac. And notice what he's doing here. Oh, look, that's Fandom Pulse on screen. What could he possibly have to say about this?
Overtly Christian channel, so I hope you enjoy.
And an overtly Christian channel, by which he means an overtly white Christian nationalist channel. Now, some of you may object, wait, if John Delarose, if John of the Rice is Latino, he can't be a white nationalist. And I would remind you that white Christian nationalism is an ideology. It is not an ethnic identity. So being that it's an ideology, any human is susceptible to believing in it. So when John of the Rice and John F. Trent and Angry Badger and all the other people we look at today describe themselves as Christians, and they say, and they talk about this being an offense to Christians or in some other way speaking for Christians, just remember this is a project to politically colonize the Christian identity that's been going on for decades now. This is an adherent of either trad-cath, far-right Catholicism, or white Protestant evangelicalism, branding itself as the default Christian. They're not talking about this from the perspective of being an Episcopalian or a Quaker, or a member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church or anything like that. There may be people in those populations who agree with them as well, but Christianity has a diversity of opinions and a diversity of theologies on every single issue, and no one faction speaks for the entire religion or the entire identity. So remember that. When you hear these guys say Christian, insert white Christian nationalism, because that's what they're really doing.
I'm also writing my own overtly Christian fantasy, guys. And this is in a style that...
Oh, interesting. You're writing your own overtly white Christian nationalist fantasy. That's interesting. There's a lot of great fantasy fiction out there written by and sometimes for Christians, Chronicles of Narnia being one of them, Lord of the Rings being another one, both of whom have fandoms that were colonized by white Protestant evangelicals in America across the 1980s. I lived through it and saw it happen, basically. So again, no, you're not writing a Christian fantasy. You're writing a white Christian nationalist fantasy. Important distinction. I wonder, by the way, I'll look it up later on. I wonder how the folks at Lorehaven feel about John Delarosa's novels, if they are aware of them. Lorehaven is a site, a blog, and I think a podcast run by Christian fans of fantasy and science fiction. And they have propped up a lot of the alternative ecosystem of Christian fantasy publishing. I haven't read any of it, but I know they're out there. I've seen the showrunners of Rings of Power interviewed on their channels, and I've browsed their library and their catalog of books and stuff, and I don't recall seeing John of the Rice mentioned there. I'll look that up later, because it would be indicative of how Christian his writing really is, if the main source of conservative evangelical Christian fantasy fandom doesn't know who he is or gives him bad reviews. But maybe that's for another video. Let's continue.
Would Netflix leave Aslan alone and actually make him the god figure he actually is as an Alec?
There's no reason we can't have an adaptation of the Chronicles of Narnia with Aslan as a female-voiced character that is nonetheless faithful to what C.S. Lewis wrote and respectful. It is not even radical Christian theology to posit that God is both masculine and feminine. That's not even a radical proposal. That's more or less mainstream Christian theology for thousands of years. That's why it says in the book of Genesis that humans, male and female, were created in his image. Both men and women, and other genders too, bear the image of God. So it's not even radical to say that a depiction of the Christian God can be a female or be voiced by a female. And I think it's worth pointing out here too that Meryl Streep is in her 70s, so I doubt she would sign up for a franchise that's going to give her commitments for the next decade or so. I don't think a person in their golden years would want to do that sort of thing. And for all we know, this is just one step along the path of having multiple different actors voice Aslan, depending on what the particular filmmaker wants to do with that story.
This is horrible. This is atrocious. Greta Gerwig is doing this intentionally. This is evil, frankly.
Greta Gerwig is doing this intentionally. This is evil, frankly. Why? What's evil about femininity? What's evil about women? I thought women were image bearers of God, just like men were.
If Netflix and Gerwig do indeed pursue Streep to play this, it is completely contrary to C.S. Lewis's vision, obviously.
No, it is not. Not at all. Again, we don't know exactly what Greta Gerwig is going to do with this. We don't even know if this is true, first of all. Like, this was a story that hit the algorithm and was released basically on April Fool's Day. This could all just be a rumor that got out of control, and they're just deciding not to comment on it. But Meryl Streep has played a man before. We don't know that just because she is being tapped, assuming she is being tapped to play the voice of Aslan, we don't know that that means that Aslan is going to be portrayed as a female lion in this movie. That's all speculation. But even if it's true, it is not in any way against what C.S. Lewis wrote. Not in any way. C.S. Lewis has many passages in many of his writings where he understands the concept of God not really having a gender as we understand it. God is both masculine and feminine. And again, as I'm sure you will see me mention in other segments of this video, This is not even radical Christian theology. This is like boilerplate Christian tradition going back centuries, arguably to the beginnings of the church. C.S. Lewis, being a medievalist, would be well aware of all of the poetry and all of the philosophy and all of the theology that was produced, like from the church fathers all the way up through like the Reformation or so, talking about feminine images of God. He might even have been aware of all of the depictions of Christ's side wound as a de facto vagina giving birth to the church. C.S. Lewis was far more nuanced about his religious beliefs and his theology than any white Christian nationalist ever has been. And if they really looked at his theology closely, there's a lot they would not like about it. They are just using C.S. Lewis as a proxy for their own beliefs. They are projecting their own ideology onto him because he's a popular writer, and they can use it to recruit people into their ideological project. The argument that this is an attack on Christianity or an attack on C.S. Lewis's legacy is frankly bullshit, but it's bullshit that can be convincing to impressionable people who love these stories and don't want to see them, quote, ruined by some evil agenda, right? It's very telling that John of the Rice calls this evil. That blows my mind. I would like John of the Rice or any other alleged Christian who's upset by this to explain to me theologically why Christ, who you believe to be the creator of the universe, an omnipotent being, could not incarnate as a female in some other world. The idea that he could or would not do that, or that she could or would not do that, hinges on the intrinsic or the inherent belief that there is something inherently corrupt or evil about being female. And you're not hiding your misogyny very well here. Again, merely changing the sex of Aslan will have next to no effect on C.S. Lewis's themes or messaging or anything else if it's otherwise a faithful adaptation of the plot and characters and so forth. It's a cosmetic change at, I won't say at most, they could change more, but it is no worse than being a cosmetic change. It's not evil. It's not part of an agenda by Hollywood to destroy Christianity. That does not exist. It's a figment of your imagination. You are tilting at windmills if you think that's happening.
Deacon Harrison Garlick, host of the Ascend Great Books podcast, reacted to this on X. He says the humiliating destruction of what you hold dear is the point.
So notice what is going on here. I appreciate, first of all, I want to say I appreciate John of the Rice for actually going farther into the Fandom Pulse article than the big dogs would, right? Like Nerdrotic would not go this far. Nerdrotic would stop reading at the paragraph just above this one, most likely, because he doesn't want to tip the hat and reveal that he's engaged in Christian nationalist propagandizing to a secular and apolitical audience. John of the Rice is being more honest about it because he's part of the Bush Leagues. This is where the big dogs' talking points are tested for the first time. You're probably going to see, let's say that this rumor is verified, and Meryl Streep either accepts the role of Aslan or is actually offered it but turns it down. In other words, let's assume that this story is verified. You might then see it get picked up by Nerdrotic or Geeks and Gamers, where they will engage in the anti-feminist talking points and talk about all the allegedly crazy things that the feminists are trying to do and call Greta Gerwig woke or whatever, but they probably won't show you the religious propaganda that's in the deeper parts of the article. But that religious propaganda, that far-right white Christian nationalism, is the entire point of all anti-fan content. It is the end goal, the creation of a theocracy. And it's not anything else.
Hollywood, Netflix, these evil people who take the ticket, who
Evil
really
people.
are selling their souls over to Satan to make these things.
Try to imagine Nerdrotic saying something like that. I don't think he would say something like that, despite the fact that Nerdrotic would happily use Fandom Pulse as a source, or that Park Place as a source, try to imagine him saying that Hollywood is run by people who have literally sold their soul to the devil. I can't imagine him saying that, at least not at the current stage of his career. And he wouldn't say that. Maybe he's not a believer. I don't know about that, but it doesn't matter, because he's fully aware that what he's engaging in when he uses a source like Fandom Pulse is Christian nationalist propaganda. Say what you want against Gary of Nerdrotic, but he is not stupid. He has to be aware of what he's doing. That's why you should not trust him or any of his orbiters. They are playing hide the ball with their real agenda here.
Not create. They can only destroy. They can only morph things into something corrupt, right? That's all they have the intent of doing. And they're bitter about it. These people are understanding that they're not creative geniuses. I mean, what is Greta Gerwig really? Oh, she did Barbie. Well, she didn't create Barbie, did she? No, she just made...
Bro, what a cringe take. If you think Greta Gerwig is not at least talented, you have no grasp on cinema at all, bro. None. Lady Bird is an awesome movie. Her adaptation of Little Women is an awesome movie. Barbie is an awesome movie. There's a lot more that goes into being a creative genius than simply writing the story yourself. That could be one version of creative genius, but being a film director is not fundamentally about writing or inventing your own IP. It's about executing an adaptation of the script into a visual medium. And that involves so much artistry and expertise that taps into all kinds of other different kinds of genius. You don't have to be the writer or the creator of the property to be considered a genius.
A silly parody mockery movie that capitalized on the brand to a bunch of people who were nostalgic about Barbie. That's all she could do. And she made it into a film.
Wow. Imagine a person who wants us to return to tradition complaining about nostalgia for a brand. Wow. All right, buddy.
And his train wreck, of course she did. So what's she going to do? She's going to take this, which is a beautiful work of Christian, and absolutely do the same thing. Just make it into a mockery that destroys it. That is their only thing they can do. And that...
How is it a mockery other than that there might be a woman playing the voice? What is it that's inherently wrong with a woman voicing Aslan the lion for one movie? We don't know if it's for the next 10 years or so. We don't even know if this is true. But notice how the only thing he can point to say that this is a mockery, that this is evil, is the possibility that Aslan will be female. Either just as the voice or as the character being fully female. That's it. He's essentially arguing that being female is evil.
Way they quote made it their own. That's how they feel they created something. And of course, the more pushback they get, they feel like they've done even better, right? And they're going to get paid loads. They get their worldly reward for it. I mean, that's how it all works.
I wonder if John of the Rice here has read Dante's Inferno or Milton's Paradise Lost, which are both basically fan fiction where they did their own thing and put their own spin on the story.
Because Netflix wants to promote this, all the evil surrounding all that wants to promote this kind of thing every single time. They love to destroy the culture. They've absolutely eviscerated pretty much everything in American culture that we hold dear. I mean, it's true.
Okay, I'm going to explain this one more time for the idiots who don't get it, for the John of the Rice out there in the audience. What you're complaining about is capitalism. Capitalism commodifies absolutely every aspect of human experience, the things we hold most sacred. I believe Marx actually described it as the difference between the sacred and the profane. Capitalism profanes everything, right? And the stuff that you identify as a problem with Hollywood, like forced diversity or rainbow capitalism or whatever, is all a function of the system commodifying everything. Diversity is being forced on Hollywood from below. Diversity in Hollywood is capitalism responding to a change in the demographics of their future workforce and their future markets. By 2045 or 2050, right around there, a majority of people in the United States will not be white. There will be more openly queer people, and there will be more educated women in the workforce and in the markets. So it is in the best economic interest of firms right now to start tapping those markets and start marketing themselves as attractive employment prospects to the workforce of the future that's being born or already has been born right now, that is going to be more ethnically and gender diverse than it's ever been. They have no choice. It is a change in the material conditions that is forcing Netflix and Disney and all the other people you complain about into diversity. They are not forcing diversity on you or anyone else. It is inevitable. So I would argue there's nothing inherently evil about any part of that equation except capitalism itself. But even that's a stretch.
I mean, Rings of Power has done this to Lord of the Rings. It's absolutely obliterated. Star Trek's become the terrible thing.
Look, I've expended a lot of bandwidth defending the Rings of Power on my channel. I don't want to get too much into that here, but I will point out that nearly every plot line on that show hinges on a character doing the right thing, doing the morally good thing in the face of overwhelming and growing darkness and evil. That is straight out of Tolkien, and that is a time-honored Christian theme. And if you can't see that, you do not understand Tolkien, you do not understand Christianity, and you do not understand media. Do you imagine that in ancient Rome, there were Greek mythology nerds who felt that Virgil was trashing the lore and destroying civilization by writing a version of the Trojan War in the Aeneid that made Odysseus look like a jerk? This is just how storytelling works, bro. Storytelling, and Tolkien talked about this too. He called it the cauldron of story. Story is a bubbling brew of ideas and characters and themes that we carry with us across the centuries, and people have always tapped into it to tell new stories with those characters and themes in ways that speak to their current circumstances. That's never going to change, and that's the way God intended it, arguably.
Always about their identity politics, and it's always about doing this kind of thing. It's really obnoxious.
Right, because calling yourself a Christian, claiming that you speak for Christianity, is not identity politics when you don't speak for the entire Christian community. Not even close. There are plenty of Christians in the world who are also feminists and progressives and liberals. In the United States, liberal and progressive politics is deeply entwined with religion. It's only been in the last couple decades since, not coincidentally, since white Christian nationalism began infecting religious spaces, that younger generations have been alienated by this kind of stuff. Christianity is a complex and often problematic tradition, obviously. Just because Christian nationalism is a new thing doesn't mean there are no problems with Christianity before it. But Christianity has been deeply intertwined with the left in this country for pretty much the entire existence of the country. And conservatives do not own Christianity. They don't own C.S. Lewis. They don't own Tolkien. They don't own any of the media that they complain about.
Hopefully the C.S. Lewis estate wakes up and realizes these people are bastardizing his legacy. I don't even know if they care at this juncture. We'll see.
Just as with Rings of Power and the Tolkien estate, I would trust the judgment of the estate more than I trust the judgment of anyone on YouTube, including myself. The Tolkien estate understands J.R.R. Tolkien's intents and themes better than anyone on YouTube. Same with the C.S. Lewis estate. Trust them over any of these channels. Whew, sweet Jesus. That was exhausting, wasn't it? I hope you found it entertaining. I hope that the little bells and whistles I put in this video entertained you. But I also hope you walk away with the lesson I was trying to convey to you. That all of this is astroturfed. All of the outrage you see on YouTube over Marvel or Star Wars or the Rings of Power, and how the creators of these properties are trashing the lore and betraying the memory of the original creators and that kind of stuff. All of that is political propaganda. There is no culture war. At least not in the sense that these people mean it. There is no conspiracy in Hollywood by cultural Marxists or any other secretive group of people to wage war on Western civilization and tear down Christian tradition or traditional masculinity or anything like that. None of that is happening. The only political agenda in Hollywood is capitalism. They are only interested in making money. And when you focus on the effects of that, when you focus on what the capitalists in Hollywood are doing to ensure that they make future profits and have a viable future workforce as being the cause, you've gotten the power relations backwards. Diversity and non-existent gender ideology and all these other windmills you tilt at are not being forced into culture by Hollywood. Hollywood is being dragged into them by changes in the culture. Politics is not downstream from culture. Politics and culture are both downstream of objective material reality. The objective material reality is that the American populace is going to be more racially diverse, more sexually diverse, more gender diverse in 25 years than they are right now. And there is absolutely nothing that can be done to stop that. The genie is out of the bottle. So when you see companies like Netflix and Disney adapting to that reality ahead of time, and you think the problem is all of the brown people and all of the queer people, you're just a bigot. You have misunderstood what's going on. And if you're someone who watches these channels or watches the channels that the bigger channels that these channels are testing out talking points for, I would encourage you to stop. And specifically, if you are someone who identifies as a Christian, I would encourage you to step out of the basement of white Christian nationalism and explore the much larger mansion of the vast, ancient, diverse, often problematic, but also often beautiful Christian tradition that came before that, and recognize that so much of the discourse you see on channels like the ones we've looked at here is uniquely American and almost entirely modern. It's not ancient Christianity. These people do not speak for all Christians. They are trying to colonize your identity with their political ideology, and you should not let them do that. I, for one, am looking forward to Greta Gerwig's Narnia adaptation. I've loved every movie I've seen by Greta Gerwig. I trust her creative judgment. If she thinks Meryl Streep, being the voice of Aslan, can highlight some themes in C.S. Lewis's work that maybe the rest of us aren't clued into, but are beautiful to explore, I'm willing to go down that road with her. And I would hope that you would be too. I think I've wasted enough of your time here. I'm doing a little experiment with this video because I think YouTube's algorithm has shifted to support longer videos than just like 10 to 12 minutes or whatever. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, if you like the content you saw here, you know what to do. I don't have to remind you, you're all grown-ups, mostly. So do the thing for the algorithm. And until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women. Thanks for watching.